Welcome to another episode of 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. 40 Minutes in the Old Testament is a 1517 podcast network podcast. You can go to 1517.org/podcast. Check out all of the podcasts that are living over there. And while you're over there, make sure you check out everything else that 1517 is doing. Articles, academies, events. Check it all out. And, partake of it. I mean, it's free for you. I mean, we're spending all this time creating all this material. Go check it out. That's the least you could do. Check it out. The most you could do, though, if you're looking for the most you could do, you could hit that donate link and become a contributor. See, that's the most you could do. The least you could do is check out the content. The most you could do is support the content. And so if you're one of those people that do that already, thank you very much. If you're not, you want to be one, we would very much appreciate it. You can make a one-time gift or become a reoccurring contributor. We would appreciate either one of those things. Helps keep all of this stuff going on, keeps it all free. Chad, we are in Isaiah 17. Got through the first couple of verses. This is the oracle concerning Damascus. A lot of oracles going on. I don't know how deep in the oracles we are here, but this is not the first one nor the second one. We are deep into oracles, and the oracles are, very similar to each other. They're mostly bad news about what's about to happen. So this is like you might have heard of this thing called the gospel from Chad and I, if you've been listening to the 40 Minutes in the Old Testament. Well, the gospel's news. It is. It's that good news. That's what it means. It means good news. Now, this oracle is not that. It's not that. See, it is news, but it's a different kind of news, and it's not that gospel kind of news.
No, this is not some good news for Damascus or for the northern kingdom or for the southern kingdom either. And I think this is I have to look at my list, but I think this is the fourth of this first set of 5 oracles we've had against various nations. So we got one more to go after this. But this is the oracle against Damascus, because I think we mentioned in last episode, it's kind of a combination because it's against Damascus, but it's also at the same time against, especially the northern kingdom. So Damascus is connected with the Arameans or the Syrians because it's their capital. And so because you had the coalition between, or the alliance between the northern kingdom of Israel and the Arameans or the Syrians, that is the people of Damascus, then what happens to them also is going to reflect upon what's going to happen to the northern kingdom, which is why you have Ephraim mentioned in in verse 3, the fortress will disappear from Ephraim and the kingdom from Damascus. So you've got the northern kingdom of Israel, and then you've got the Syrians joined together in this bad news oracle. Now we're going to switch gears in verse 4, at least slightly, and now we're going to focus upon Jacob. So a little bit different shift here, and this is going to be the image of basically deprivation under the kind of the metaphor of starvation or of crops being diminished. So this is the next 3 verses, which I'll read now, 4, 5, and 6. And in that day, the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean. And it shall be as when the reaper gathers standing grain, and his arms harvest the ears, and as when one gleans the ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Gleanings will be left in it, as when an olive tree is beaten, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the highest bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruit tree, declares the Lord God of Israel. So it starts out here with the humiliation, the bringing low of the glory of Jacob. And then that is depicted metaphorically with a guy who's basically on a diet that is imposed from outside. He doesn't choose to lose weight. Instead, the fat of his flesh will grow lean, which in our culture is like, oh, that's good. He's losing weight. But in this culture, that's not good. Basically, in any ancient culture, if you're losing weight, it's bad news. Yeah. Which is, that is a cultural shift that you have to think about. Because, if I come up to somebody and I say, hey, I've lost some weight, or they say to me, hey, I've lost some weight, then we're like, good for you. In the ancient world, we're like, man, I'm really sorry. Things must be terrible if you're losing weight, because that means you don't have enough to eat. So they're losing weight because they're suffering. They're suffering the result of divine punishment. And then that shifts, partly shifts anyway, to talking about why his flesh is growing lean. It's because there's not hardly anything left in the crops and in the vineyards. So you got a few ears of grain, you got some gleanings here and there. Olive tree just has a few berries, few olives that are left on the top branches of a tree. So this is another way of saying what we've seen several times in Isaiah, where there's going to be a remnant left. There's going to be a punishment. There's going to be divine justice. There's going to be, therefore, just a remnant that is left. So that's all poetry, by the way. If you're a podcast listener who's like a serious listener and you've got your Bible open in front of you and you're not just listening, you'll see that 4, 5, and 6 are poetry, and then 7, 8, and 9 we're going to shift to prose. And Isaiah does this. A lot of the prophets do this. They'll do some poetry, they'll do some prose. There's some poetry, they'll do some prose. And really, a lot of times, unless you're actually looking at it in the text, you can't necessarily tell where one shifts to the other. But anyway, that's 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, the reason for all this, so when you're dealing with Jacob, of course, the people of Jacob. So if you have this oracle against Damascus, like this is going to happen, there's not like here's my sort of heart behind it. It's just sort of like, this is what's going down. You get to Jacob, and this sounds pretty bad. Like you don't want this to be happening. Like basically, you guys are going to be all starving. But then what he's going to do is say, and this is meant to, you're going to be brought low so that your eyes will be lifted up. So this is forced dependence, right? So where nothing else, you're reduced to one avenue of salvation now. Like there's nothing else that can save you, and anything else that you maybe would be tempted to look to in the past, you won't be looking to that because you know that there's no hope in any of those places.
Yeah. This is the common biblical theme, right? The one who lifts himself up will be brought low.
Yeah.
The one who exalts himself will be humbled. I mean, you see that in Hannah's song, you see that in Mary's song, you see that all throughout the Psalms, and Isaiah, of course, is no exception in hammering home the same reality. And verse 7 kind of picks up with this idea because it says, in that day, there's a lot of in that days, by the way. And here we have another one. We're going to see a bunch of them, I think, either in the next chapter or the following one. There's like a string of 5 in that day. So in that day, what's going to happen? Man will look to his maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. So that's what he's going to look to. What will he not look to? Well, he will not look to the altars, the work of his hands, and he will not look on what his own fingers have made, either the Asherim or the altars of incense. Now, I don't remember when I learned this. It might have been G.K. Beale that first pointed this out to me. But there is this common theme that you see, Old and New Testament, by the way, where something made with hands is negative, which is another one of those kind of a cultural or at least linguistic shift that we have to make. Because today, if we talk about something handmade, when we use that language, it's like, oh, that's going to be better than a store-bought. I mean, that's the contrast, right? Is this handmade or store-bought? Where the implication being if it's handmade, it's superior to something you just buy at the store. But not in the Bible. If in the Bible it's handmade, it's not good. In fact, most of the time, if it's handmade, and maybe all the time, if it's made with human hands, it's connected with not just inferiority, but with idolatry. So, and that's clearly what's going on here when he says that you will not look to the altars, the work of his hands, or what his fingers have made. These altars, we're not talking about the Jerusalem altar. We're talking about the altars for Asherim or the altars of incense. So these are altars to foreign gods. And you see this reflected, for instance, Daniel 2. Remember that image of you got the huge statue with the golden head and all the various metals, and then his feet are a combination of clay and iron. Well, that statue is destroyed by a stone that strikes it, and we're told that stone is cut without hands. So in other words, it comes from God. And then Jesus in Mark 14 is quoted as saying, he's going to destroy this temple and build another made without hands. And Paul talks about a circumcision without hands. So all of this non-handmade is just another way of saying it's God-made. So don't be looking to the work of your hands. Instead, be looking to, as it says here, to his maker and the Holy One of Israel. So anyway, this is that shift that you were talking about, where you're forced into dependency upon God instead of looking to what your own hands have made.
Yeah, this is different nowadays for sure. I was just in Arizona on spring break with the family, and my wife she grew up there, and she really wanted to bring home one of these like clay quails, which like everybody in Arizona has in their house apparently. And so we were looking at some of these, and I was looking at the price of these clay quails, and I was like, man, they are really proud of these clay quails. They really think a lot of these. And my wife's answer to why they were so much is like, well, they're hand painted.
Well, yeah.
Every one of them, they're all hand painted. You're like, oh well, I mean, makes sense now. I guess I need to go buying one of these then if they were hand painted.
Yeah,
but
they'd
that
be
was
cheap if they were factory painted.
If they just were like sprayed on by some machine, who cares? But like, no, someone painted these with their own hands, and so So there's this implication like immediately this is more valuable because someone took the time to paint it. By all of them were painted by hand. When you think about the way the Bible talks about the work of your hands and this kind of stuff, when you're doing things like one of the first things that comes to mind is like the Tower of Babel. Like the second anytime like man does anything with his hands, he's like, I think I'm God. Like, I must be God, right? Or at least I'm a God. I'm more godlike than I thought because look what I've done, right?
Yes.
I think of like, did you ever see? I'm sure you did. Like the old Tom Hanks movie Castaway.
Yeah.
And when he first makes fire, and he's like parading around, he's like, "I have made fire." And he's doing this thing, and he's the god of this island now. He's speaking this out, like, "Look at what I have done." This is how humans are. Is that you say like, "I created, therefore I must be the creator."
Yeah.
This is why it always leads to idolatry. And mostly, yes, you could make some altar or some pole or whatever and say like, I'm going to worship this. But this is like one of God's arguments, right? Is that, but you made that. Like, and you're like, yeah. So like, what is idolatry ultimately? It's like that you are worshiping self because you're worshiping what you've made. So you are the God who now creates the thing you worship. Well, what's the only thing that you believe is more powerful than the thing that was just made? Well, you made it, and that's why this kind of stuff is always dangerous.
Yeah.
And that's why I told my wife we're not buying any hand.
Put that quail
quails.
back.
We're not gonna.
Not gonna buy that piece of hand painted idolatry.
Yeah. What do you think? I bought it, but. I didn't think of that argument. I should have, though. I'd been like, this is idolatrous behavior that we're engaging in here, paying extra for things made with human hands.
A couple things come to mind. One is that's why in biblical Hebrew, the only one who creates is God. So the verb for create, bara, is only used with God as a subject. So, we talk about, like on social media, you're a creator, or we're creative. We create this, we create that. But biblically speaking, you don't. You can make things. You can use the verb asa to make, but you can't use the verb bara to create. Only God does that. And the other thing I think of is when Isaiah, later in his book, will mock the idolaters. He's like, you take a stick, you chop it in half, you make a god out of one half, the other half you make a fire, you cook your dinner, you bow down to the half that you made into a god. It's great comedy. It's great mockery. And because it's true. It's like, you're just taking a stick and half you're using for a fire and then half you're making into a god. What are you doing? Have you stopped to think about the implications of what you're doing here? So
Well, that's why.
yeah,
That's why, like the graven images thing is like. I mean, so you have this in the commandments, of course. This is what I should have done with Jasmine. Like that looks a lot like a graven image. That quail, but the idea here is like that we're so absurd that God would have to tell us like, hey, don't carve out something and then worship it. And you would think that would be like a given, like because that would be ridiculous. Like I'm going to worship something I made. Like I'm going to make my thing. Hey, look, I carved this. It's my God. What? But God knows that we're ridiculous creatures, and so He has to tell us, "Hey, don't do that. Like, don't carve out, something, and then be like, from now on, we worship this."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the wild things about idolatry. It's really a superior worshiping an inferior. I mean, a superior in the sense of we're made in the image and likeness of God, but you're worshiping a piece of wood or a stone or money or whatever it might be.
Yep.
Yeah. So picking up with verse 9, another in that day. In that day, their strong cities will be like the deserted places of the wooded heights and the hilltops, which they deserted because of the children of Israel, and there will be desolation. A bit of ambiguity here, exactly what this means, but most of the commentators that I've consulted here agree that what this is talking about with these strong cities, now like the deserted places of the wooded heights, which they deserted, is a reference back to the Canaanites, the Perizzites, all the other ites that lived in the land of Israel, who were then displaced by the children of Israel, and they just kind of abandoned their fortresses, and now they're deserted places on the wooded heights. So they deserted would be a reference back to the Canaanites. So basically, so that's the historical allusion, but the prophecy has to do with what's going to happen to the cities of Israel. Their cities are going to be deserted, a desolation, because they have bowed down to the work of their hands. And then picking up here with verse 10, we will read it through the end of the chapter. It's just
figure
10
out
through
why
14.
all this is happening. You get a 4.
Yeah, what's all this going on for? So, verse 10, for you have forgotten the God of your salvation. Well, there you go.
There it is.
There it is.
That's the whole thing right there, isn't it?
Yeah. And in classical Hebrew parallelism, not only have you forgotten, but you haven't remembered the rock of your refuge. That's one of the great things about Hebrew poetry. If you were like dozing off in the first half of the verse, the second half of the verse is going to like clarify it for you. A lot of times, if it's parallel, if it's this synonymous parallelism. So you've forgotten the.
Well, there could be two things that could be true, right? Where you've forgotten the God of your salvation, which is a great way of putting this, because what you need in this situation is salvation, and it'd be really good if you hadn't forgotten the one that can do that. So you've forgotten the one who brings salvation. You forgot him, and in the midst of it, because we've seen this over and over again, unlike maybe like the time of the judges, where they'd like forget and then remember.
Mm-hmm.
No, they haven't done that. Like they forgot and didn't remember. Like this is a problem.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's one thing to forget as long as you remember. But if you forget and you don't remember, then you've doubled down on the devastation. So you have not remembered the rock of your refuge. Therefore, though you plant pleasant plants and sow the vine branch of a stranger, though you make them grow on the day that you plant them, and make them blossom in the morning that you sow, yet the harvest will flee away in a day of grief and incurable pain. There seems to be a kind of a I don't know if it's an allusion or what you want to call it, but at least a reference here to some sort of idolatrous practice under this metaphor of pleasant plants and the sowing the vine branch of a stranger, only because so the word for stranger there is zar, and it's used in a lot of different contexts to talk about something which is connected with with the other nations. It's even the word that's used sometimes for like an adulteress or a prostitute, a strange woman in those contexts. So I think part of what's going on here when they planted pleasant plants and so the vine branch of a stranger, it's this allusion under the image of planting to Isaiah or to Israel's incorporation of idolatrous practices into their worship. So this isn't talking necessarily about agriculture. It's talking more about worship. So you're gonna plant them. You're gonna make them grow. They're gonna blossom. So it appears, in other words, as if you're gonna have success. But what's going to really happen? Well, the harvest will flee away in a day of grief and incurable pain. So no matter what you might think is going to be successful in terms of your worship of other gods or bowing down to the work of your hands or whatever it is you're putting your trust in, besides the rock of your salvation, in the end, that will come to nothing.
Yeah, I think of so many times when Israel is talked about like a vineyard. Jesus does this, right? Or he talks about this vineyard, and so much so that he will then say that like he's the vine, right? So this is the right vine. So he's the vine, his father's the vine dresser, all that kind of stuff. And it seems that Isaiah here is saying, you've like planted some strange vines in here. Like this is not the vine that Jesus says he is. This is some other vine. Obviously, then you could be talking about idolatry, because if you have the incorrect vine, that is the thing you must be connected to, the thing that you're growing out of, and that's like some strange, wild vine. That's not good.
Not good, yeah. Oh, yeah, that fits with Isaiah 5, too, where you have the parable of the vineyard, and God does everything for his vineyard, and it's harvest time, and he looks at the crop, and rather than it being this wonderful fruit, it's stink fruit. You know, it's a wasted crop because the fruit that is arisen is not in conformity with what God has created it to be. All right, then we're not at the end of the chapter, but verse 12 and then the first verse of chapter 18 both begin the same way. In the ESV, it's translated as ah, like ah, the thunder of many peoples, or ah, land of warring wings. You can translate it that way too. I think a better word in English would be like a woe or alas, because this word, which is a hoy in Hebrew, kind of often has a negative cast to it. It's kind of a funeral kind of word or a lament sort of word. So woe or alas, because of what's coming up. So woe or alas, the thunder of many peoples. They thunder like the thundering of the sea. Ah, the roar of nations. They roar like the roaring of mighty waters. The nations roar like the roaring of many waters. But he will rebuke them. Talking about God. God will rebuke them, and they will flee away, chased like chaff on the mountains before the wind, and whirling dust, or I prefer the word tumbleweeds there, can be translated. That's a modern Hebrew word for tumbleweed, gal. So tumbleweeds or whirling dust, whichever you prefer, before the storm. At evening time, behold, terror. Before morning, they are no more. This is the portion of those who loot us, and the lot of those who plunder us. So we got kind of a shift here. I mean, we've been talking about Damascus. We were talking about the Israel and Judah. We've been talking about how you have the people of God trusting in things which are not gods. And you have the image there of the strange plants within the vineyard of Israel. But now Isaiah's perspective shifts outward to kind of a bigger horizon. And here he's talking about basically the threat to the people of God under the image of many peoples. And they're described under the image of thunderings of the sea or the roarings of mighty waters, which, as we've seen multiple times in other places, is a pretty common kind of stock metaphor for the nations. So they're often depicted as like the sea, the waves of the sea, because in the Israelite conception, so the Israelites viewed themselves as kind of like dry land people. where everything is stable and secure and non-chaotic. And then the sea was for them the emblem of chaos and confusion, where God is not ordering things. And so a lot of times you'll have the Gentiles depicted under the image of waves or storms or seas or things like that. So here you have them compared to the thundering of the sea or the roaring of many waters. And, you know, if you're thinking about the Gospels, you have the storm and the Sea of Galilee kind of in the background here too. And there's a beautiful then overlap in Old and New Testament here, because while all this is going on, you know, just kind of picture this. I've never been on a storm at sea. Just imagine you have been, and how, you know, the sound and the feel, everything is, you're being thrown back and forth, and, you know, you seem like you're on the brink of destruction. And then one thing stops it. God will simply rebuke them, and it's like that, over. And that's the storm at sea, right? He stands up and he rebukes the wind and the waves and the storm, and there's this hush. And in Isaiah, anyway, a shift is made where you go from all these nations being like the roaring of mighty waters, and now they're like chaff or like tumbleweeds, which are driven by the wind. It's a I don't know. I love this because it's a beautiful, immediate contrast between what seems to be unstoppable, and then God just simply stands up and speaks a word, and it's over. And now these roaring waves become rolling tumbleweeds.
Yeah, Isaiah does this a lot. I mean, the Bible does this a lot, where it's describing something, and it's like, well, here's what's going to happen, and it's going to be horrible. I mean, literally the line before this is a day of grief and incurable pain. And it's like, but here's how. But don't worry, I mean, I am going to cure it, of course. And so there's this thing that God does where, even in the language he uses as he's speaking these things. So in and of yourself, so if you've like abandoned the God of your salvation and forgotten the rock of your refuge, well, this is a unstoppable thing that's going to happen to you, because I'm not with you. And so if I'm not with you, there's nothing that you can do. However, it's no thing for me at all. It's no thing for me. And so there's both of these things like are true, right, at the same time, that God is saying, yeah, you left me and forgot me, and it's going to be bad. Of course, when I decide to intervene, it's over in a hurry. In fact, so much so that, you know, you're going to think that at night this is there's no stopping this, but by morning it's all over.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that is a kind of a nice follow-up to this. You know, the sun's going down, darkness is coming, and there's terror. And then morning comes and phew, they're gone.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so historically, we haven't got there yet. Well, we covered this when we covered Kings. We'll hear this again when we get to Isaiah 36. But yeah, that wonderful scene where the Assyrians have surrounded Jerusalem, and, you know, they're uttering all kinds of threats and got all these Assyrian soldiers. And it looks like it's the end. And the sun sets and morning comes, and they're all gone because God has sent his messenger to wipe out the Assyrian army. Behold, before morning, they are no more.
Yeah.
So it's going to be the portion of those who are looting and plundering Israel. And that finishes chapter 17. So we got the oracle against Damascus and everything that entailed happening in chapter 17. Now we're going to get to chapter 18. We're going to hear about Kush, which is another name for, well, Nubia is probably a better identification. Sometimes you'll hear this referenced as Ethiopia. Ethiopia in the ancient world was not in the same borderland as modern Ethiopia. So Kush, think of it as Nubia, think of it as Ethiopia. But anyway, that's what's going to be described in these opening verses. So Begins with the same Hebrew word that we translated above as woe or alas, but the ESV has ah. So woe, alas. The land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Kush, which sends ambassadors by the sea and vessels of papyrus on the waters. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. This is a bit of a challenging chapter because part of it, you can't really see this if you're just working with English, but there's a lot of debates on how you should translate verse 2, description of the people who are tall and smooth, feared near and far, mighty and conquering. There's a lot of Hebrew issues there, which we're not going to get into the weeds on that, but that's one of the challenges of this chapter. And there seem to be some kind of assumptions that you know what's going on here, which is not always super clear. But my best understanding of what's going on is, first of all, we have a description of Kush or Nubia. It's a land of whirring wings, probably in reference to the insects that are there. So this land is going to send out ambassadors. So ambassadors, of course, are going to be heading to another nation. Presumably what's going on is they're looking for help against the coming Assyrian invasion, which, of course, would have happened in multiple places during this time period. We see the Assyrians do it. We see the northern kingdom do it. We're going to see the Ethiopians. We're going to see the people of Kush. Everybody basically sees the handwriting on the wall. They realize the threat of the Assyrians, and so they're looking for help, for someone to join with them in some kind of alliance against the coming onslaught of the Assyrians. So they're sending out ambassadors, and how are they going to get there? Well, they're not going to go by land, which takes a lot longer to travel in the ancient world. They're going to go by sea, and they're going to get in their ancient version of a speedboat, which are the vessels of papyrus. I mean, so when we hear papyrus today, we think, the ancient equivalent to paper that they used for, of course, writing purposes. And yeah, that was certainly one of the usages of papyrus in the ancient world. But you could also turn papyrus into these boats, more or less. So the ambassadors pile into their papyrus boats, and they're going to head out somewhere. So they're going to go try and get an alliance with another nation. So then Isaiah shifts to say, go, you swift messengers, to this nation of the Cushites. So it seems as if Isaiah is, first of all, depicting the ambassadors leaving Cush. And now he's addressing this other group from wherever they are, saying, hey, I want you to go to them. Go to this nation, which is described in the ESV anyway as tall and smooth, a people feared near and far, mighty and conquering.
It's just tall people who shave.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of tall people who don't have facial hair. They all shave.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, so the word that's translated here is tall. It actually nowhere else in the Old Testament is it referenced someone who's tall. There are words that mean that, like the word used to describe Saul is related to the root gavah, which means to be tall or to be lifted up. Here, it's more the sense of like draw out or prolong. So one commentator says maybe long-standing would be a better translation of this, but it's, who knows? We'll stick with tall and smooth. And just another kind of Hebrew thing here, when it's described as a nation mighty, that could be, the Hebrew there is a nation kav. So the Hebrew word is just written twice, kav, which might be a reference to like a gibberish. Like that's what it sounds like when they speak, kav. Kind of like the Greeks have referred to everyone who didn't speak Greek as barbarians because everything they said just sounded like bar. So maybe that's what's going on here with the Cushites. They just sound like they're saying gov. But anyway, that's how they're described here as the people of Cush. So that's kind of all set up for verse 3. So verse 3 is where you can picture Isaiah speaking to the ambassadors, saying this: all you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountains, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. For thus the Lord said to me, I will quietly look from my dwelling, like clear heat in sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, when the blossom is over, and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. They shall all of them be left to birds of the prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth. And the birds of prey will summer on them, and the beasts of the earth will winter on them. And then we finish this out. There's one more verse. At that time, tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts, from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty, or a nation that speaks gibberish, and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. And where are they going to bring this tribute? To Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. So chapter 18, it's a pretty short chapter. I mean, there's only, 7 verses in it, and it's all about the Cushites. But what seems to be happening is you got ambassadors coming from the land of Kush. They're trying to find an alliance. Isaiah basically addresses them, and as he addresses them, he addresses anyone who's going to be listening, saying, look, listen, here's what's going to happen. God, who is in his dwelling place, is kind of watching everything. It says he quietly looks from his dwelling, kind of the images of God's watching what's going down. He's seeing what you're up to. He sees where you put your trust. And before the harvest happens, he's going to pull out his pruning hooks, and he's going to start lopping off branches here and there, clearing it all away. So much so, there's going to be such a destruction that everything that's going to be left is basically going to be for the birds of prey or for the beasts of the earth. They're going to come in. They're going to summer and winter in this place. And the result's going to be, after all of this, after the destruction of the hopes of Cush, and by implication the hopes of anyone who doesn't put their trust in the Lord, that they're going to now actually turn to the Lord of hosts. And they're going to bring tribute. Where? All the way to Mount Zion, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. Now, we saw this earlier, I think, with the Moabites, where they're going to send tribute, and they're going to come, and they're going to put their trust in the line of David there in the city of Jerusalem. And the same thing's happening here with the people of Kush or Nubia, which is one more way that Isaiah already now, he's going to pick this up in a big way later in his book, but already now is dropping very clear hints that the promises God makes to Israel aren't just for Israel, that other nations are going to join. The Moabites, the Nubians, we're going to see in the next chapter, the Egyptians. He's laying the groundwork here for a worldwide influx of believers to the God of Israel, which, of course, is ultimately what the gospel is all about, the destruction of the dividing wall between Jews and Gentiles when Christ brings everyone into his one body.
Yeah, this is the two things going on, right? Where you have like all this language of like the judgment of God's people, and then at the same time, you have this promise that the promises made to God's people are going to not just apply to God's people, but are going to go out and bring other nations in, right? And so, while God's people might be judged, I mean, he is going to remain true to his promise. In fact, the people who are, as you have that language all the time, of course, of like, you've forgotten me, you've left me, you've abandoned me. He's going to actually bring other people from the outside into that promise. There will not be like nobody clinging to this.
Yeah. It's really a beautiful picture that in Isaiah of what Paul talks about, like in Ephesians and in Galatians, all over his letters, because of course he's preaching to Jews and Gentiles. He's saying, "Hey, this was promised long ago, right?"
Yeah.
And now it's coming to pass, because finally we have the people of Israel filled with people from outside too, so that now you're not Jews and Gentiles, you're not male and female. You're not slave and free. You're all one in Christ Jesus. And Isaiah is preaching that oneness too here in his own distinctive way. And we'll see more of that when we in the next episode when we get into chapter 19.
Yeah, going to find out about Egypt. All right, man. Well, I will see you then.
All right, see you then.